My name is Gina Clonan. I'm the founding president of the Connecticut Women's Hall of Fame. For nearly 3 decades, the Hall has worked to discover and share the stories of women. Our various educational platforms acknowledge the individual and the collective feminine voice. This will be a half hour, or maybe a little bit more today, of an intimate and informative chat, followed by 15 minutes of your questions, which we encourage you to submit at any time during this webinar by simply clicking the Q&A bubble at the bottom of your screen or register your question in the chat. I'll try to get as many as possible. Our goal is simple, a virtual gathering to talk about today's important issues. We hope this will be a useful source of information while offering up helpful takeaways. I am so honored today to have as our guest, former NPR senior correspondent, author of Putin Country, A Journey into the Real Russia, co-founder of the NGO Assist Ukraine, and 2012 Hall of Fame inductee. Please welcome Anne Garrels. Thank you, Anne, for being here today. It's so great to see you again.
And you too.
For the sake of review, or in some cases enlightenment, let's outline a brief history of the region. Annie, this war did not start in 2022. Is it fair to say that the dissolution of the Soviet Union, which began in 1988, was the launch pad?
Ukraine's history has been one of conflict for 2,000 years. But yes, in terms of identification of an independent country, a sovereign nation, which which Russia acknowledged in 1991, yes. And it's been a confused history since then.
You said in your book, Annie, Putin Country, that in the Soviet Union during the 80s, you were considered a persona non grata, but you returned visa in hand in the 1990s with your husband, Vint, to whom you dedicated your book. What draws you to this region?
Well, I speak Russian, and for reasons I don't even understand. I learned it in college. I'm not sure why, but I just became obsessed with the culture, the history, and it, lo and behold, in my first job at ABC, they sent me to Russia.
Came in handy.
It did.
Well, so shortly after the fall in 91, as you just mentioned, Ukraine declares independence from Moscow. Russia recognizes it. But since then, there have been influences and motivations that have moved Ukraine toward a very pro-Western status. What are some of those, do you think?
Well, Ukraine is flipped and flopped. I mean, the independence was universally voted for in a referendum in 91. And then and Ukraine declared neutrality. It tried to balance between Russia and the West. It was highly corrupt. It had huge economic problems. It has huge identity problems because of its conflicted history for 2,000 years. It was invaded repeatedly, and although ironically, in the Soviet period, the Soviets, while they wanted it Ukraine Soviet, they also encouraged a kind of Ukrainianization of it. So there was always a contradiction between who it was. But in the course of the 90s and 2000s, Ukraine increasingly, well, especially in 2014, there was a huge, the current president of Ukraine initially was sort of saying it could be part of the West, but then Russia said no, And that particular president, Yanukovych, caved to Russia. And there was a big demonstration, a violent demonstration across the country saying, we want to be part of the West.
And did you say that was in 2014 when Russia invaded Crimea?
Well, as a result of that, Russia invaded Crimea.
I want to ask you a question. So Putin was elected prime minister in 99 and president in 2012. Time magazine recently stated, throughout his 22 years in power, Putin has seen Ukraine as a fraternal nation, tied to Russia by bonds of faith, family, politics, and a millennium of common history. Is he always been focused on this kind of Ukrainian nationalism that he embraces?
It was not clear to start with. I think it really clearly in 2008, when the United States said that Ukraine could be part of NATO, that really began the fight. And most Russian experts I knew and know said that that was a terrible mistake to suggest that the second largest country in Europe, I mean, Ukraine is huge, could be part of NATO. NATO expansion was obviously threatening to Russia, but suggesting that Ukraine, which had declared its neutrality from the very beginning, could be part of, and encouraging it to think it could be part of NATO. And the irony is that NATO as a group has to accept a new country. There was never, there might have been some idea in the early days in the 2000s, early 2000s, that Ukraine would be part of NATO, but it was never serious. It was all, but the US kept suggesting it. And the idea, though, that it would be was never, and certainly not in February when Putin invaded. It was
we certainly know that
happened.
With the United States and our Western allies of NATO certainly have a role in this conflict. And I would like to talk about that a little bit more later. But just to go back to this idea of the bonds that Russia and Ukraine share, do you think the Ukrainians today feel that as much as Putin feels it?
Well, clearly he made a very great mistake when he invaded. He thought it was going to be a walkover. Clearly, sending troop convoys up to Kiev, he thought it was going to be a few days war or perhaps a few days week. He underestimated. From 2014 on, when he took over Crimea and then invaded the eastern provinces of Donetsk and Luhansk, which were predominantly Russian-speaking areas of Ukraine, he made a serious mistake. And increasingly, Ukrainians sort of said, we don't want to be part of Russia. And they were also looking at Russia. There was two things. There was a growing sense of Ukrainian nationalism. There was also, they're looking at Russia saying, we don't want to be like that. So it was a double whammy.
So let's explore this a little bit more, particularly when it comes to the mindset of Putin, as you just say, having made these grave mistakes. Russian historian Jane Burbank says efforts to understand the invasion tend to fall into two broad schools of thought. The first focuses on Putin his state of mind, understanding of history, or even his KGB past. The second points to external developments like the Union's collapse, but chiefly NATO's eastern expansion as the underlying source of conflict. You touched on this a little bit just a few minutes ago. Which is it, or is it just the marriage of the two? Putin's dead set intentions and the westward allies' expansion?
Well, there's no question that NATO expansion Putin saw as a threat, although it was not a real threat, and he knew that. He also has a very disturbing idea of history. He goes back 2,000 years to the founding of what was the founding of Ukraine, Kievan Rus, when Kiev, long before Russia even existed, and was just Moscow was a pit. It didn't exist. Kiev had a moment of glory in about 1000. It joined the Orthodox Church. He sees it as the beginning of Russia. He does not, and in his speech before he invaded, he basically said, Ukraine does not exist. Ukraine as a sovereign nation doesn't exist.
Pretty powerful. So let's talk a little bit about this man. My understanding is he was trained in Germany as a spy in what is called agitation and propaganda. Social media makes it easier for all countries to use these tools. How effective do you think he's been with that? And are we doing the same?
Oh, of course. I mean, social media is social media. And what he's done now in Russia, I mean, what the war in Russia is the war in Ukraine is a double whammy, because he's invaded Ukraine, but he has also now slammed shut the doors on social media, or tried to, in Russia. And he has created essentially a reign of terror. Friends of mine now, if you dare to call what he has done in Ukraine a war, as opposed to what the Kremlin calls,
a special mission, isn't that?
Exactly. You potentially face 15 years in prison.
Wow.
And he is, for the first time, I didn't think he would. The internet was relatively free until the war. Relatively free. A lot of people in Russia have VPN, virtual private network, which they pay for, and they could get access to all sorts of unofficial information, and did, and especially young people who downloaded, games and got in. Although young people were not so much interested in information, but they were interested in being part of the world and playing stupid games and whatever.
So has he been able to shut down the VPN? Those private networks are no longer available?
No. The interesting thing is, until now, VPNs are still available. All of my friends who have VPNs get information from the West, but you have to pay for it in hard currency. And they can't pay for, eventually their subscriptions are going to go.
Because your friends are telling you that they're also suffering economically?
No, because you can't pay in hard currency now.
I see.
Credit cards don't work.
Oh, dear. So we're back to the man, Putin. They say that he relies on others does that leave him vulnerable to these mistakes and misunderstandings? Is he isolated, as some say, Annie?
I I wish we knew more about, I wish I knew more about who is around him. I see reports saying that people have said he's crazy to do this within the Kremlin circle. But, he runs the place single-handedly. He's got everybody by the balls.
Wow.
Because the country is so corrupt. Everyone is dependent. And a lot of people, most Russians I know, not my close friends who oppose him, but contacts I have had over the years, just sort of said, okay, I'm willing to deal with this, to put up with him because I can go to IKEA, I can get a mortgage, I can buy new furniture, I can improve my life. I mean, that's the middle class. 20% of the population of who are the Russian conscripts are living below the poverty line. Mm-hmm. And they only get state TV. And mm-hmm. So everybody in a way has been co-opted for whatever reason.
And that, Annie, is actually brings me to the next topic, his perceived wealth. What do we really know? It's estimated at perhaps 200 billion, along with, the billions that are shared among the oligarchs. And it's said that he's motivated by money, among other things. What would you say to that?
Well, how does he, he has an incredibly elaborate, exquisite villa down in the Crimea, but how does he use his money? He doesn't go on yachts, to my knowledge, but certainly he has allowed others to do that. Mm-hmm. I don't begin to know what he thinks his wealth is going to get him. And of course, the issue now is people talk about, for instance, eventually that, there will be, he will be accused of war crimes or whatever. To do that, he has to appear personally at the International Criminal Court. He is never going to do that. Mm-hmm. So the idea that he can access this great wealth, or it's going to be of benefit, is sort of crazy.
So while we know that he's filling his own pockets and don't know where to spend it, you alluded to the fact that he also, through his tenure, has bolstered the Russian economy, improving the lives of many. And even now, with an invasion of Ukraine, his popularity is near 70%. Is that propaganda? Is he still that popular?
It's not so much that I would say he's that popular. And also, you have to ask yourself, okay, if a census person comes to you, or somebody asking a poll, given the fact that if you criticize the president, you face, or say it's a war, you face 15 years in prison, what are you going to say?
I like him.
Yeah. I think that, but yes, there is a large portion of the population which I think is just sort of numb. They can't really, no, actually, I will correct that. Some unquestionably think that the West has taken advantage of Russia. There is no question of that. A lot just have sort of gone along with it and with him, because to oppose him was to lose whatever they had. however modest it was. And also, there's really been, he's cracked down so much on the opposition. There is no viable opposition now. People don't know who else. It could be worse. I mean, if I hear it from one Russian, I hear it from many of them, that if not Putin, then who?
Mm-hmm.
And also, you know, look at our own country, how divided it is.
Of course. So Annie, we're talking about the Russian people, and it's been often written that they have this tremendous capacity for suffering, connected to economic strife or military endeavors throughout their history. You've lived among them, you speak the language, you've traveled the country, you've befriended many. Tell us a little bit more about the Russian people, both urban and rural dwellers, aside from the fact that we understand that they don't really have freedom of speech now or before or in the future. But tell us about the Russian people from your point of view.
Well, the $64,000 question is, how will they deal with the pain of sanctions as they evolve? I mean, so far, prices have gone up dramatically. The ruble, however, has miraculously stabilized, although that won't last. To what everybody's asking the same question: how will people respond? Will they say, damn it, it's the West? Or will they say, damn it, it's Putin? I mean, it's very confusing. I mean, one very close Russian friend of mine said, I know how awful the war is. I know I can watch the BBC because of VPN, and I won't. I don't want to know.
Because what can you do with that information? Not much.
Not much. Now, the interesting thing, I think, is that when the body bags start coming back, except they're not going to come back.
No, and I've heard that, you know, Russian mothers, we've even seen reports on it, are in mass demonstrations, so to speak, individually to find out where their children are, and they're not coming back. And the reports are that they're fine, and you know they're on these clandestine missions, and they can't report back. But we already know that the losses to the Russian army are great, but the families are not even notified.
And we saw this in Chechnya, a war that the Russians fought against a region of their own, which tried to break away, having been told by then President Yeltsin, take whatever power you can. Anyway, Russian soldiers then who were killed were just put in railway cars. Families were never informed. In fact, the military then, and God forbid it continues, the officers were continuing to take their stipends. So the mothers didn't know what had happened to their sons. They came to the war zone and they ended up protesting. And I don't know how they're going to deal with this one, but I think over time, when they realize that, you know, they don't know what has happened to their children. They haven't been told. The bodies have been burned in place or dumped.
Annie, we're talking, you know, obviously about the spoils of war and wondering where this is going to take us. Do you think, we referred back to his wealth and the camaraderie around him with the oligarchs. I see that, of course, some of them have been forced to kind of step aside because of sanctions. Do you think there's any hope in that group of whoever they are to either advise him otherwise or encourage a change?
Well, clearly, when Putin went into Ukraine, he thought it was going to be a walk in the park.
Right.
That proved to be incorrect. I don't know now what his ultimate intentions are. Is it just to take the East and the South and then move back into Ukraine? And what his advisors are saying? There's all sorts of speculation about that. Some of his closest advisors are saying, you overestimated, regroup, rethink. I don't know. And and not knowing what ultimately he wants, I can only go back to, the fact that he's said repeatedly that Ukraine doesn't exist as a country. I mean, that is his bottom line. And so is he going to be just satisfied getting the East and the South? And who are going to be the negotiators?
Mm-hmm.
Can you negotiate this?
At this point in time. And Annie, yesterday, he launched a new intercontinental ballistic missile test as a warning to the bystanders of the conflict. The U.S. and its allies have held off direct combat for fear he will use them. Will he? I know, $1 million question. But I'm just wondering, I mean,
I can't believe he would, because he knows he'll threaten and threaten, but on that score, he knows that there would be a direct response.
Now, I know for our guests, it's coming on the bewitching hour of 1 where we usually take questions, but if you'll all allow me, because I believe this is the most important and relevant webinar the Connecticut Women's Hall of Fame has launched in 2 years, I'm going to go a little over time. I will get to your questions. And if you can't stay with us, I want you to know that this is recorded and will be uploaded to our website within 24 to 48 hours. So, as a women's history organization, Annie, we're devoted to telling our stories. Historically and globally, women and girls have been the spoils of war. Who among us in our own lifetimes cannot forget the plight of the Chinese, Vietnamese, Ugandan, Bosnian, Herzegovinian, Kuwaiti, Rwandan, Muslim, Nigerian, Somalian, Yazidi, Croatian, Iraqi, Kurdish, Mexican, Burmese, Colombian, Libyan, Korean, Syrian, Congolese, and yes, now Ukrainian women tortured, raped, murdered, starved, or forced to flee. Without tears, Annie, where do we begin? Ukrainian women and children, nearly 5 million refugees.
Well, when this had started, I wanted to go report about just what you've said. But for health reasons, and thank God, the passport gods got in my way, because my passport, I hadn't looked at it through COVID, had almost expired. So I set up an NGO to help Ukrainian women, all Ukrainians, fight for their lives and their freedom inside Ukraine. And we've been remarkably successful. I had no idea what I was doing, but in a matter of weeks, with 2 partners, we've got more than $500,000 of medical supplies, trauma kits, helmets, flak jackets into Ukraine. And many women, I mean, yes, women and children have fled in large numbers, but huge numbers have now gone back, and huge numbers have stayed
to help with the effort.
In a way, Putin has galvanized the people of Ukraine, whether they be Russians or Ukrainian speakers or whatever. I mean, one of my closest friends in Ukraine is a 70-year-old woman. She's Jewish and Russian speaking. And she has been a key funnel in Kiev, helping disperse funds to the defense forces. She gave them a Purim dinner. I mean, is this a Nazi?
You know, I just want to stay a little bit more on the topic of women. And of course, we see the imagery. It's heartbreaking. But behind the headlines remains the truth. Women continue to bear different and additional burdens of war, yet they are underrepresented in all decision-making platforms on de-escalation, conflict prevention, mitigation, and other processes in pursuit of peace and security for the people of Ukraine.
Although I have to say, amongst some of our best couriers who are moving supplies into Ukraine are women.
That is so inspirational to hear. And on the other line of inspiration, they describe themselves as the rear front line, a reference to the military term of back operations supporting those doing the fighting on the front lines. They are women, making up 15% of Ukraine's army.
Exactly.
Another incredible inspiration for all of us here today to take away. I think it goes without saying that recent estimates indicate that 54% of those needing assistance in the crisis are women and children. We have to give a shout out to neighboring countries who have been incredibly supportive and generous. And when I ask the question, what might we as women stateside do to help? I want to remind you all that Annie has set up this incredible NGO. It is assist-ukraine.org. We're going to put it on our website with a link to donate. And I'm hoping you will go there today and do that as well. All the proceeds go to help. There's no staff, there's no paid people. And it goes directly into Ukraine, helping those on the ground. Is that right, Annie?
Thank you. Yes. And we're hand carrying all the materials to Poland, and we're paying for the freight and the flights because shipments into Poland are backing up and time is of the essence. And of course, I mean, there are two parts to this. The people in Ukraine fighting for their lives and their freedom. And then there are the women and children who have fled, and where there are, I must say, great refugee organizations working in the region. The Biden administration has been really slow to bring in refugees, but now they're saying, as of today, that, you know, if Ukrainians are specifically sponsored by churches, NGOs, they can come in. It's going to take way too long. It's been 2 damn months. And only now have they figured this out. But if any of you can sponsor a family, I recommend you do it.
Agreed. Annie,
also, please help me.
Of course, please help you with your NGO. And I will mention that again. And as I said, it will be on our website with a link to donate. I'm going to start to get to some of the questions because there's quite a few, Annie. One dear friend of the hall says, I see your book was published in 2016. Are you thinking of a sequel?
Oh, no.
I think Annie's had a lot on her plate.
I'm having to learn to build a website, not exactly my skill set. And that is,
Okay, another person says, hello, I'm wondering if Anne has heard of Professor Carol, her first name, who is a Russian lit scholar and offers programs including music to homeschool students and adults online. I ask only because Anne said she's fluent in Russian and may enjoy speaking with Professor Carol for pressure. Did you ever hear of her?
No, well, I'm not sure exactly. No.
Yeah, because we didn't get a last name. Maybe that question, then maybe that person can send us a little more.
Or send me, if you go to assist.ukraine, assist-ukraine.org, there's a contact, and send me the name.
Okay. So this is so many interesting questions here. And to your knowledge, did Putin have a terrible traumatic childhood to explain his behavior? Is he on the autism spectrum?
Oh God, wouldn't that explain it?
We're all looking, right?
No, I think he had a perfectly, well, he was 70. He grew up after the siege of Leningrad. So,
we didn't know.
the Soviet Union was not a cakewalk, but.
Right. Annie, a dear friend of the hall, Sherry, thank you for asking this question. She wants you to elaborate a little bit on what does it mean to sponsor a family and how do you go about doing this?
Well, if I'm not an expert on this, but the Biden administration today announced the conditions under which refugees could come here, and they have to be sponsored individually. So I think if you go to your church or an NGO, and I'm sure there will be stuff online today on how you do that. That's not, I've been dealing with Ukrainians inside Ukraine, although obviously concerned about refugees too. Go to Save the Children. They may know.
Yeah, that's the best place right here in Westport.
They've really been amazing.
Here's an interesting question as we're talking about women, and you mentioned that your Russian counterparts say, if not Putin, who then? This person wants to know if Putin does not want to reestablish the Soviet Union, but more of a czarist empire with him as czar, who will succeed him? His daughters?
I think not. They have sort of stayed in the background largely. And that is the $64,000 question, which it should be $164 million question. And that is what people, are scared of. It could be worse than it is now.
You're absolutely right. I know you don't have an answer to this, but you might have another thought. There are lots of opinions. We want yours. How do you think this might end?
Badly. If he just goes into the East and the South, that's going to be bad enough. But I don't think that's enough for him. I don't know what he will consider victory, and he needs a victory. Thousands of Russian troops have been killed and injured. And eventually Russians are going to sort of say, and for what?
Mm-hmm. A friend, a couple of questions referred to that. I didn't read all of your questions because I think some of them throughout the conversation have been answered, but there is one last one that I've incorporated in my last thought to you, Annie, which is in your decades of reporting, analyzing, and participating in Russia's history, economy, and society, fluent in the language, what would be one pearl of wisdom that you could share with us that maybe we could share with our children? Because we're all in discussion about this most bizarre worldwide situation.
I did not think Putin would do this until the Monday before he announced that Ukraine basically didn't exist and started talking yet again about Nazis. I don't know where this is going to end. And I mean, I think that Zelensky, says we're willing to be neutral. We'll give up NATO, which was a crazy idea anyway. And for Ukraine. And I'm speechless, frankly.
I so understand. And of course, we're all feeling this, but you are most likely feeling it so personally after much of your life has been dedicated to this region, and you have so many friends there. And you just talked about Nazis, and of course he used that idea, that misinformation, as a platform. And we need to remind ourselves that Ukraine has a large Jewish population, including its president.
Exactly. And as I said, the woman who has really been helping me when Kiev was under assault, a friend of mine who's Jewish and Russian speaking in Kiev, was distributing funds to defense forces, bravely helping families who were, in utter distress. She and, had, as I said, had provided a Purim meal to the defense forces proudly and publicly. She has simply been astonishing and brave.
Along with so many others. Annie, there's another couple of questions that are coming in. This one is from Patricia. She says, I was wondering if you think that we, the United States, could or should do more for Ukraine.
We're really caught between the rock and a hard place. I think that we are doing finally. I mean, we were slow on the uptake on absorbing refugees. We've been helping since 2014. Train, I mean, and that probably gave Ukrainians, and that probably gave Putin the heaves, but it was, I think, they're moving stuff in. We don't, obviously, it's not publicized. I mean, it's more and more reported how much is going in, and Putin has said, Biden has said 800 billion or whatever. And it's moving in pretty expeditiously from what I understand, although there's still huge gaps, and that's where we have moved in to help with trauma kits and helmets and flak jackets, and, you know, the US can deal with, you know, howitzers and whatever.
You know,
But
Annie, I heard a military analyst, because all these questions about what the West is doing and how much we're doing. I heard a military analyst yesterday, along with a congressman, when someone asked the question, should we be talking about getting involved, troops on the ground, the whole idea?
no,
And the response was, we should be thinking about it, and we are, but we should not be talking about it. Would you agree with that?
I don't even think we should be thinking about it. The neighboring countries would be apoplectic. I mean, many of them been incredibly brave, like Slovakia, already to send, you know, anti-aircraft missiles in. But, you know, they are the vulnerable ones.
Yeah.
Although the Russian military has proven itself to be not nearly as good as they thought they were. I mean, I had seen the Russian tanks go into Chechnya in '94, and the same issues that we just saw as they went into Kiev, and they wanted to take Kiev. They didn't go up there for nothing, and they were ill-supported, bad communications, bad command and control on the ground. I mean, they have regrouped and concentrated now in the east and the south with a new command and control, a local one, as opposed to directing it from Moscow.
Mhm.
But it's, and then they did in 2000 exactly what the Russians have done again and again in their wars since then. They destroy everything in their wake. They just raze it to the ground, as they did in Chechnya. And
they're doing in Mariupol.
And I watched it in 2000. And
we're watching it again.
Yep.
I think, you know, you touched on this question before, but I thought as it's come up again, and it's phrased a little differently, what power do you think the oligarchs have in persuading Putin to negotiate because of sanctions, not so much maybe personal influence or money? You know, we talk about him as if he's a lone rider, but he can't be all alone in this. He's got military people, he's got oligarchs, he's got a team, no?
Well, the problem is some of the oligarchs are dodging and weaving and finding other places to go. The military, the KGB, what's known as the Siloviki, the KGB successors, they have nowhere to go but Russia. So what they're telling him and how they're hoping that the negotiations might play out where sanctions are reduced, whatever, I don't know. None of us know. But I think Putin is thinking that, you know, since he's said that whoever criticizes him, criticizes the invasion, military operation, are scum, traitors, and face whatever. I think he thinks that he can prevail and that they'll suck it up.
And I think that brings me to maybe my one last question, because I think it's important as we're talking about, you know, broad opinion and access to information. Op-ed guru Thomas Friedman recently coined the conflict World War Wired. with billions of us watching. He goes on to say that because of that audience, this has quickly turned into the big battle between the two most dominant political systems in the world today: free market rule of law democracy versus authoritarian kleptocracy. Do you agree?
Fundamentally, yes. I wish I believed that we were healthier at home, but yes. And Putin has certainly shown that since, I mean, just as I said, it's a two-pronged war. It's one against Ukraine, but now it's against anyone who disputes him at home. And that was not true 6 weeks ago. I mean, no, there was no real opposition, but people, oh, they could muzzle along okay.
Yeah. And now the whole world is watching. Annie, I can't thank you enough. And I'd also like to thank the Avangrid Foundation in partnership with CNG, SCG, and UI for supporting this series. And I want to remind all of you who joined us today that today's presentation, like all of our webinars, will be uploaded to our website, cwhf.org, within a day or two as part of our educational programming platform. And again, so many thanks to Ann Garrels for this important and illuminating conversation on the war. And now is your chance to join Ann in her efforts. Please give at assist-ukraine.org. That's assist-ukraine.org. And once this webinar is uploaded to the Connecticut Women's Hall of Fame website, we will also have that link available to you. I hope you'll all join me next month for a special presentation. Look out for that announcement soon. Until then, Annie, any final word?
Just thank you. It is my honor to talk to all of you. You know, 6 weeks ago, I had no idea that what I was doing, and thank you for letting me express my confusion, my determination, and to an amazing group of women.
Thank you again, and we'll be in touch. Everyone, I wish you a good day. Happy spring. Oh, I forgot one thing though, everyone. I'm putting up a poll right now. If any of you are still on, and there's quite a few, would you mind doing that? I've got so emotionally carried away with this webinar. We do this so it helps us get the best webinars to you in the time in which you want to participate. So it's just a 3-question survey. It's up on there, available to you now under more. Just click polls and fill it in for us. We want to bring you the best and the brightest always.
Gina, do I have to see the results?
No, they're going to be fantastic. Are you kidding? What are the questions? Oh, the first question is, did you find the conversation relevant? Did you find the conversation helpful? And would you like to hear more conversations around this topic? Yes, I will fill you in on all those answers. And I'm sure. Okay, someone has asked me to say the website again. Annie, would you like to say your website one more time?
Sorry.
Oh, caught you at a bad moment. I'll take over. It's assist-ukraine.org. That's assist-ukraine.org. Thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Again, my apologies for going over time, but I believe it was in our best interest. We've got people on board filling out the survey, so I don't want to end this, but Annie, you're welcome to take a break, and I will get in touch with you privately, so we might get together in our neck of the woods, huh?
Please. It's been too long.
It has been too long. Since 2012 was the last time I saw you, and Vinta accepted on your behalf while you were sitting in some hovel in Russia, and I Skyped you in, if you recall. We didn't have Zoom. I Skyped you in, and I was so nervous that it wasn't going to work.
And it did.
And
Oh,
it did.
God,
And you
thank you,
were
my love.
rightly inducted into the Connecticut Women's Hall of Fame. We're honored by your presence there.
Thank you, thank you. And so good to see you. I want to actually get together with you, though. So
I will. I promise I will. And I don't know why my phone is ringing, but Annie, you're welcome to sign off. I'm just going to keep it open for people who are continuing to fill out the poll.
okay, my love.
Have a great day.
You too.